His intense gaze tracked over what he could see of my face, and even with the veil, I felt unbearably exposed when he looked at me like he did then. I hate this. Hate what? I asked, confused. Hawke didn't respond immediately. I hate talking to the veil. Oh, understanding rippled through me as I reached up and touched the length that hid my hair. I imagine most people don't enjoy it. I can't imagine you do. I don't, I admitted, and then glanced around the room as if I expected Priestess Amelia to be hiding somewhere. I mean, I'd prefer if people were able to see me. He tilted his head to the side. What does it feel like? Air hitched in my throat. No one had ever asked me that before. And while I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about the veil, I wasn't sure how to put them into words, even though I trusted Hawke. Some things once spoken were given a life of their own. I walked to one of the chairs and sat on the edge as I tried to figure out what to say. Suddenly, my brain sort of spit out the only thing that came to mind. It feels suffocating. Hawke drew closer. Then why do you wear it? I didn't realize I had a choice. I looked up at him. You have a choice now. He knelt in front of me. It's just you and me, walls, and a pathetically inadequate supply of furniture. My lips twitched. I'm gonna keep that in a pathetically inadequate supply of furniture.
Welcome back. We are in bed with books. Today you'll be joining me, Melissa,
and Bethany,
as we talk about Jennifer Armentrout's book From Blood and Ash.
Yes, the first one.
Yes, so the first one in what at this current moment is a trilogy. I believe it's going to be longer. I'll double check that. My heart says it'll be longer. Passage that you heard at the very beginning of this episode from chapter 19. We wanted to start out this episode with that passage to really get that point going, get that across. It sums up Poppy's dilemma in a really succinct way.
Yes. And Hawke's role.
Yes, definitely Hawke's role.
Yeah.
I love that he's kneeling in front of her during that. Like, it's like his position is a position of like supplication.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's not trying to overpower her in this part. He's trying to just show her. So from this point on, spoilers. The way that we're kind of structuring this, since this is our first like real bookish episode, is we've got kind of topics that we've drawn out from our readings of this and we've narrowed it down to. And so we're just going to kind of go through those topics. So if we jump around the plot itself, please don't shoot the messenger. We're just here to have a good discussion.
I think the first thing we want to address is Armentrout's writing. Her writing style, but also like the way she brings the characters out. She has a really subtle way of making the characters' intentions known through dialogue, through physicality.
Well, I think one interesting thing is that this whole book is all from Poppy's point of view. It's very like stream of consciousness. Like we're reading her thought process as she's thinking it, but we still get just as much insight into the other characters. Like Poppy, we're going to kind of talk about this later, but like Poppy is kind of not self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not stupid because you can see how much she analyzes everyone else's actions around her.
Yeah.
She's very aware of her surroundings. She's just not very aware of herself. And I think that's a really interesting way to keep it this one point of view while still giving us like a well-rounded story.
Right. And I think you put it really well when you said that just because it's from her point of view doesn't mean you lack any kind of insight from other characters because of the way the spark happens between Poppy and the other character. Like you can see
with her gift, you mean?
Yeah. Well, so she has magical gifts where she can sense someone's emotions through smell and taste. Is it just taste? I can't remember.
It's mostly taste, but I mean, honestly, smell and taste are so intertwined that sometimes her explanations are like a little mixed, which I also like. I think, but it started out as pain. So the very beginning, she could only feel pain, but then like a little while in, she could start to feel other ones. Yeah, sorry, pain from others. And so then she could start to like feel and identify other emotions as well. And so that's kind of when she realizes that something's up, obviously. I feel like that also adds added pressure to her because she's like, my gift is morphing, and I don't even know that I want this gift. I don't know that I want the pressure that comes with this gift, and there's suddenly more.
When I first opened this book, it really just captured me immediately because
it's a really strong opening scene.
It is, yeah. She's in like she's in the red girl, which is like a
brothel,
essentially. She's the maiden who's supposed to be like completely pure and untouched and no one can look at her. And so she goes there out of curiosity. This is her first look into like the forbidden for her. So you already know she's curious. You know she's not completely sold on this life of being like this religious figure, untouchable thing that has so put upon her. Like she's curious to explore. And where does that exploring happen? In desire. She wants to kind of like see what else is out there.
I also feel like by starting it that way, like you don't just one day wake up and think, I don't like this, let's go to a brothel. Like you kind of ease into it. Like it's established from the beginning then that she definitely doesn't follow the rules when it comes to being the maiden. It doesn't mean she's explicitly breaking them. Like she doesn't always get caught breaking them. But there's been like a gateway into this beginning of the story.
Right. And this maiden motif was very much like reminiscent to me of like A Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, because of the way that it's very like in her head. She's working things out. She's like very stream of consciousness. And so I feel like that writing style I always really loved is really fun to watch her like make those shifts and like perspectives through her interactions with people. And
no, 100%. Like the opening scene really probably only takes place over, I'm going to say like time-wise, max an hour. Like, that's being generous. And she's managed to squeeze in like 6 chapters pretty much. And her chapters are not short. Like it's not like a short 6 chapters. It's like a good chunk of the beginning of the book. But it never feels drawn out because from the very beginning, we're learning how to read as Poppy.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, what did you think about that first scene with Hawke there?
I thought that it was the best thing that I had read in years. I wish I was exaggerating. Like I got so happy, and I'm not being euphemistic. Like I just genuinely I got happy reading that scene. She's introduced to our love interest of the book, Hawke, when she tries to run off and not be caught by one of her like personal guards who's shown up. And so she goes and hides in what she believes to be an empty room, which turns out to be occupied by the hottest new knight at this palace. And he doesn't recognize her because nobody can see the maiden's face. She's veiled all the time because sexism, I guess. When he starts coming on to her, she does not back down. And I was so into that. Like she's clearly nervous. She's talking about like how she just does not know what's happening in her body because she's never, I mean, God, she's like 18 and she's never been touched. Not just sexually, but she could probably count the number of times she'd been touched in the last like 5 years on a single hand because people just aren't allowed to. And so this hot knight just starts doing beautiful things to her. They do not have sex, and it was the bane of my existence then because the buildup in those scenes, in every scene before they have sex near the end, which I'm sorry to spoil that one too, they don't have sex until very near the end of the book. All of the sexual interactions that they have leading up to that are so good. They're almost better than the sex scenes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I prefer the ones before sex.
Yeah.
And like across the board in most books, like if it's done well, it's way better than the actual like
Because it
all
leaves,
foreplay.
yes, exactly. I was like, it leaves it up to you, I guess. Like when you read about the climax of it, it's just not as fun. It somehow feels like what I imagine Blue Balls would feel like.
Yeah.
But it was a great intro scene for him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was a big fan, big fan. But this is a part of a larger arc that she's going through, which is her discovery of her own sexuality, which I really enjoy reading about. Like, part of me wishes that I had a book like this when I was younger. I know I wouldn't have been able to handle it. I would have closed it and just like never spoke of it again.
Yeah.
But
hid it under my bed.
Yeah, exactly. Like hit it with like my non-existent porn stash. Like it would have been my porn stash. But her exploration of her sexuality is like so inherently tied into her breaking down of the maiden identity and acceptance of her own actual identity.
Yeah. So Hawke essentially enters the picture. That's not the last we see of him in that brothel. Eventually, he becomes like the knight that protects her. And
one of two knights that protects her.
One of two knights that protects her. I think the passage that we read was one of the first intimate reactions between the two, because they're not really able to talk very much at first. Like I feel like it was very much like a slow burn there for a minute before they actually like started asking each other questions. And that was one of the first like interactions, was like, because it was after like the initiation of the knighthood with like Lord, and then they're like walking away and he's like, I hate the veil. Like I just thought it was like a thunk, like, because they kind of hang out for a bit. Like I don't know, I can't remember.
Yeah, no, it's early on. It's definitely like because she spends a few days worried that he's gonna recognize her.
Right.
Because she had somehow convinced herself that like he had seen her face and not recognized her, which granted, when they met at the Pearl,
right,
she was wearing like one of those like half domino, is it called, like half masks?
Right.
So she had just convinced herself that he didn't know who she was. So she keeps wearing the veil in hopes that like he won't recognize her, which is not a good long-term plan. Like you can't just constantly wear this veil in front of the person.
Well, and then there was like a specific order where like the Lord or whatever, I forget his name, was like, it was the lady. What's her name?
Yeah, Lady and Lord Tierman.
Okay. So Lady and Lord Tierman, they're all in this room with her and Hawke, and I think Victor is there, and Tawny, maybe.
Yeah, Tawny, I think, because she's her lady's maid.
Lady's maid, yeah. They're all in the room as like the initiation of like the new knight or whatever. And like I remember it was Lady Tierman that was like, he will be one of the only people who can see without your mask. And I was like, okay, like here we go. Like,
yeah,
like of course, like what a convenient.
Let's just build up this
tension. For a romance. Like,
yeah. And then you have asshole Lord Tierman, who decides to make a snide comment about her because she's got those scars on her face from the attack when she was younger. And then Hawke says something along the lines of like, I think both halves of her face are beautiful. And I die inside because I'll never know a love like that. But no, like the veil becomes a very literal representation of like the metaphor, I guess. Like it becomes like a literal manifestation of what she's going through, and then kind of like this like metaphoric symbol of what she's dealing with. Mm-hmm. Because we'll talk on this a little bit extra later as well. Like the book is really trauma informed. And so she's like leans more into the maiden, or like I call it like maiden mode. She leans more into maiden mode when she's nervous or when she's uncomfortable, because it's how she knows how to cope with her problems, because most of her problems have been related to being the maiden. And so then jumping back to the passage, another reason that she's refusing to take off this mask is because she's so nervous around Hawke. It's
Yeah,
like
he's
this kind of barrier between them that she's imposing.
First of all, she thinks he's very intriguing from the get-go. Like
yeah, and he says literally the same thing about her.
Yeah, exactly. Like later on when they like connect about that. But like in her head, like she's very, very interested in him from the beginning. But he's also unpredictable because he's of course asking about how she feels about things and behaving. Yeah, his behavior is so different from everyone else's behavior.
Yeah.
He's the only one that has actually seen her as more than a maiden. He sees her as like a person. And so that's a good way for her to kind of keep that barrier, right? Of like,
yeah,
I don't want him to see who I truly am yet. Not until
she doesn't even know who she is.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I think it's safe to say that like Hawke is the catalyst for that's not true because she's the one that stepped into the red pearl. Obviously, the catalyst was her, but he was the one that like really motioned it forward because
he was a bit of an enabler,
and she sought him out because she knew she was attracted to this kind of essence about him that was like, I'm going to get like it out of you kind of thing.
Yeah.
Who you are, you know? And so
he asked, she wanted it.
Yeah, exactly.
She wanted it to come out. And so like he was giving her this environment where she felt safe to do so.
Right. And so he would ask the right questions that she needed to ask herself, that she needed to articulate. Definitely.
I think we could jump into talking about Victor then. So Victor is like the longest serving guard for her, personal guard. And so he's old enough to be her dad and has kind of grown up to be that father figure for her, in as much as you can be when you're trying to father a mythologized religious figure. There's a lot of conflict between Victor and Hawke, not necessarily like he never doubts that Hawke would protect her. He doesn't even hesitate to like send her with Hawke when there's danger.
Yeah, he seems to be really supportive of Hawke when it's in a protecting kind of
like in a protective manner. He fully recognizes Hawke's ability to do the job that needs to be done. But on the other hand, he's very conscious of the fact that having this man who's very attractive and who looks to be about the same age as her guarding her has raised a few problems. Namely, the very obvious sexual tension between them a lot.
Yes, we were kind of talking about Victor as like this father figure, but then we realized that he fell short in that wholly, because how can you be a father figure if you're parenting or protecting or like guiding someone who has no life of their own, that is a product of this mythologized I said that right, religious symbol. Like you can't, and I guess we haven't really talked about like where the whole conspiracy or like plot of like where she goes or supposed to go, like, and how little we know about that. But like he seems to not be able to engage with her on a more personal level because there is no after for her. Like where is he sending her, you know? He has no control over it. She has no control over it. And so there is that kind of sense of, because I think about like a fatherly duty of just being like, okay, and then you send them off to like then the next man. And so here comes Hawke, and it's like there's an issue because
he's not ready to send her off yet.
And that's not where she's supposed to go. And he's never actually had that in his mind, has never been able to like go there with his relationship with Poppy.
And I think we talk about her not thinking that far in the future because of like survival and everything. And it kind of feels the same for him. Like he's trying not to think that far in advance. He's trying to just keep her alive now. So he like teaches her how to defend herself hand to hand. He supports her emotionally when Lord Tierman like abuses her. But in terms of like the limits that he's able to go to while also staying in her life, like as much as I would have loved to see him barge in during Tierman like hitting her with the cane, if he were to do that, he wouldn't be in her life anymore. Like there's this line that he's having to tout to even maintain his position with her. And that was really frustrating because you can see how much it bothers him that he can't do those things.
He gifts her a weapon.
Yeah, the dagger.
The dagger. And that becomes that becomes a source of comfort, and it stays with her.
Yeah.
The books thus far as like a way for her to protect herself. And that is also a way that it is projected at Hawke, because she's also like constantly stabbing him. Okay, hold on.
She loves stabbing him. It's great.
Is that in book 2?
No, she stabs him in book 1.
Okay.
That's how she like tried to escape.
Oh God, I remember that. And then they like went and had like blood sex.
Yeah, they did. It was like shortly after she found out who he really was, which, spoiler alert, he is the Dark One, the one that's like rumored to be trying to return to reclaim his parents' throne. And so she takes this dagger. By this point, I hate to say this, by this point, Victor's already dead. So she has the dagger as the only living part of him. And she just like jams it straight into his chest, straight into his heart, and runs. And so you have like this symbol now of Victor, this which she relates to Victor a lot. Like she refuses to lose this knife because it is Victor's only gift that she was able to get from him. So it's almost like Victor's there protecting her when she needed it. Which like Hawke doesn't even die. Castile doesn't even die. So like it's fine. He was fine. He got better.
Got better. They fucked it out. It was fine.
Yeah. His presence is still there when she needs it. Because they were close enough that like even after his death, she's very conscious of like, what would Victor want me to do? What would Victor be doing right now? Not always to make her own decisions, but she's thinking about, well, if Victor were here, we would have done it differently. And so he's still this like specter for her. Yeah. Because he was the only like positive adult role model in her life. Yeah.
And what his death, I think it crushed me.
Oh God. Yeah.
I'm sitting in bed like crying. And I was like, Milo, don't look at me. Yeah. About this book. It's awful. Oh, I did not like that because yeah.
It was rough. And then he is like begging her for forgiveness. And she's trying to use her gift on him to relieve his pain, but she can't even conjure a positive memory because like just looking at him dying is stopping her ability to do so. Yeah. And it was just heart-wrenching, honestly. But then she uses that anger to kill Lord Mazine, the asshole who gets to help the Duke. Yeah, who gets to help the Duke abuse her. Which was satisfying, but
she loses it too.
She absolutely loses it. Like
shit, and it's awesome.
It was amazing to watch her go ape shit. But of course, it's still within the scene of him dying, and still like I'm sobbing, but also happy, but like I'm sobbing.
It was like you wouldn't expect anything less after they just took away Victor. Like, okay, he needs to die. But it never fully made up for it. Like, because it was so back to back. Because a lot of like the revenge, not that like, was it, remind me, was it Mazine that killed Victor?
No, he was just sitting off to the side. It was one of the rebels that killed Victor. Yeah. Okay. And so he just made a snide comment, basically. He made some snide comment about Victor dying, and she was not having it. I don't think there was any other way, like as a reader going through that experience with her, there was no other way to immediately release that grief than to have her just like hack into the asshole.
Yeah. Like there's no time for like revenge plotting or like any of that. She was just like, get out of here.
Yeah, like permanently.
Yeah. And just what I love from this first person psychological, like stream of consciousness writing is that you get to like, you're experiencing her trauma with her and you're exerting it as well. Like you're angry.
There's something cathartic about it.
Yes, you're feeling it. Like you're feeling your blood get hot and just want to tear limbs. Like,
yeah,
it feels only necessary that while you're with her in solitude, listening to her think about all of her thoughts, you're also in violence with her.
Yeah. You get that release.
Yes.
As she's getting it. Even though it's not complete, like she still gets knocked out because she's just completely deranged. And then she wakes up a few days later. She didn't get to go to his funeral, which was heartbreaking again. It was just like living through those feelings all over again.
Yeah.
But then the dagger just becomes this crutch almost for holding on to Victor's memory for her.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially because it becomes her only form of defense. So his job was to protect her first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't really fill in his role because it becomes so dangerous that like the queen calls for her to be called back to the capital. And so Hawke like gets together a team to take them. So they don't replace Victor, which I think is better. I don't know that I would have trusted anyone that they replaced Victor with. So in place of like that second night, they have the dagger, which she's proven in front of everybody that she can use perfectly fine.
Right.
So actually kind of going back to his death, and as he's dying, part of the reason that like it's so frustrating to read is because he's begging her for forgiveness. And I spent most of the rest of the first book trying to figure out why he wanted to be forgiven. Like, what did he need to feel forgiven for? But then as her and Hawke get closer and she's discovering more of herself outside of this maiden identity, I realized that like he didn't feel like he protected her as well as he could have. Like he protected her in a way that she needed to be protected as the maiden, but not as Poppy. Yeah. And he regretted that. And that hurt. That really hurt.
It hurt so bad.
I'm trying not to tear up right now just thinking about it.
Yeah, that was such a rough scene.
Yeah, 100%. Ooh. Okay, so sex.
How do we tie in? We need like a segue.
All right, so guys, let's talk about sex. Is that a good segue?
Yeah, that's a good segue.
Okay, so now that Victor's dead, I guess we are kind of going plot-wise. So now that Victor's dead,
right,
and she's just got Hawke, it's definitely the turning point in her identity crisis, because so Victor dies in this like attempted rebellion, and she's forced to protect herself in front of the Duchess Tierman, and in front of Lord Mazine, and none of them are supposed to know that she even knows how to use like a butter knife, let alone a full-on sword and dagger and all of that jazz. After Victor's gone, because Victor's been trying to help her hide these parts of herself so she can survive in this environment, there's really no turning back. Like, there's nothing to stop her. They know at that point. And she didn't die. Like, she revealed parts of herself and they didn't crucify her.
Right.
And so one of our favorite ways that she was discovering herself was the most obvious one, which we've already touched on, the sex.
Yeah. One of the best ones was the I can help you fall asleep.
Oh, chapter 30, it's going to live in my heart forever.
So they're on the road. So far, I think they're all of Hawke's creatures. Like, I think there's a few knights from.
It's a mix.
It's a mix. So
yeah.
Kieran's there, but we haven't quite gotten fully introduced to him. Like, he's just kind of a side character, but so Kieran's there.
He hasn't been upgraded to season regular yet.
Right. Right, exactly. So he's kind of off a few feet. I think it was like 6 or I think 9 feet. It was like a specific number.
Yeah, they're just guarding like the perimeter of their
Yeah,
campsite, which
of
is
the
not
camp.
that big to begin with.
No, and they're Hawke and Poppy are like cuddling, keeping warm.
The
And
excuse being that she has nightmares and he's got to stop her in case she attracts, what are they, Craven?
yeah, Craven, which are the what are Craven?
Craven are those who have been bit by Atlanteans. They're kind of like little corrupted little goblins, but they're people that have been corrupted. So they get bit and then it turns into poison.
Right.
You either get bit by another Craven or, as it turns out, an Ascended, not an Atlantean.
Okay. So she has nightmares, and I think this is an example of a really good way of marrying the sexual relationship with the relationship
In terms of like writing.
in terms of writing and how like using the sex scene as a way forward, not just a distraction. So she's has undergone crazy trauma. She doesn't sleep because of nightmares. She also, I think, didn't they say like she couldn't fall asleep? So she was like scared of nightmares, but she was also like her mind's running. Like there's been
Yeah, like that's why she was always wandering the city and why she eventually made her way to the Red Pearl, because like she just couldn't sleep. She was like, she would reach a point in the night where sometimes she just realized she wasn't going to fall asleep. It wasn't going to happen. So
he's like, why aren't you asleep yet? And she's like, and then she explains why. And then he's like, I can help you sleep. And it was such a great first, you're giggling like a schoolgirl. It was
Shut up.
It was such a good, I guess we should say, second interaction, because we've already had our first chapter scene.
This is like the fourth one though, because we've got the opening scene, and then you've got when they kind of
in the tree.
bump uglies. Well, when they kind of bump uglies on the parapets during the Craven attack on the Rise.
Oh yeah.
And then you've got in the trees during the night of the rebellion attack, before the rebellion attack happened. And then you've got this scene. So, I mean, it's scattered throughout. Like the foreplay is very long.
This is her first orgasm.
Oh, yeah.
So he gets
much better than my first.
So he just, and this is like perfect because this is such a young adult thing too, because it's like she's never had sex. She's only had the encounters with him. So it's like a good, like slow burn, right? Like it's not just like, okay, like fingers inside. Like it's like we worked ourselves up to this point now. And
he's very conscious of where she's coming from.
Yeah.
And he's very respectful of that.
And I like too that this scene really made me feel like I hadn't been touched in a while.
Same. I don't know if it's just like lockdown life, but like I was very conscious of the fact that nobody's touched me in over a year.
But it was like the way, because he was like over her panties.
Yeah.
It wasn't explicit at all. Like it was very like sensual and like very light and like very, I guess you could say, rated G for a sex scene. Like it was very
It was this was the scene in my notes that I said made me feel like a teenager again. There was something exciting about it not being sex. Like because you can feel that build up again.
Yeah.
And then like the anticipation of what else could happen.
Exactly. And then she fell asleep.
Yes, she did fall asleep. He was right. He was completely right.
That was a good one. And then just like the constant tension of like, we're riding on a horse together because she didn't know how to ride a horse.
Because she's been so sheltered.
So she's just like in front of him. And you know how a lot of authors have like, they fixate on like different body parts? Like that's what they choose for him to like grab on all the time. So this one, like Armentrout uses hip, like not the waist, because a waist, like a man can put his hand on a waist in a Jane Austen book, but
Victor could have put his hand on her waist.
Yeah, it's very gentlemanly, but a hip is a bit lower,
a little more intimate.
Yeah, a little more.
Yeah. And then I like the detail where she talks about him, like, he'll like rub his thumb in circles on her hip, like not sexually, like he's holding what is ostensibly like a rather like sensual part of her body. And he's just like mindlessly caressing her. It's very intimate and like special. It's not something that he has to be doing to like trick her. Like being on the horse alone could have done that. And it's a detail that told me that he's not just doing this to con her.
Right. Yeah.
Because it is kind of apparent, like, that Hawke isn't who he says he is. Like, that reveal that he's going to be, spoiler alert, the Dark One.
Yeah.
Is definitely anticipated. But I think Armentrout's aware of that. And so she has to, like, navigate Poppy's perception of Hawke and therefore like our understanding of him in a way that expresses that like we obviously know what's about to happen, but here's how he really is. Here's a little insight into like his actual person.
You were saying too that you were like, is Poppy just like can't see it? But I think a lot of it is like she is picking up on it. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that the way Armentrout writes Poppy's perspective gives away information about other characters that Poppy's like starting to like click in, but not consciously. And so like as a reader, it's almost like irony from a first person perspective.
Yeah, we can see her hit those mental walls. We can see those pop up, those little like survival instincts that have kept her alive in the belly of the beast. Because there's lines where like there's actually, let me see. Okay, so there's this part in chapter 20. And so throughout the whole first book, she just kind of clearly doesn't know what she's supposed to do as the maiden. Like she knows what she's supposed to not do, which is like not speak, not breathe too hard, not talk to people. Poppy had like not understood really what her role was as the maiden, and there's literally no information on the only other maiden in history that they know of, or that they've created, because she dishonored somehow and she was struck from their history. So they know she exists, but there's no name about her. There's no information about like who she was, when she lived. And so she goes to Duchess Tierman to try to get some of that information because she's, again, having thoughts about like, am I the maiden? What does that mean? And Duchess Tierman tells her basically that the maiden had been corrupted by the Dark One, which at this point we don't know is Hawke. But then in chapter 20, her and Hawke are talking, and she says something along the lines of, I didn't dare look at him. If I did, I feared I'd do something incredibly stupid, something that the first maiden could have done that had made the Duchess feel that she was unworthy. So in this situation, she's comparing like herself to the old maiden and Hawke to the Dark One.
Ooh, yeah.
So like on some level, she's aware that Hawke is somebody, or that like,
or it's a foreshadowing of
like it's like some kind of like, it's definitely foreshadowing, but like in this comparison she's made for herself, he's like the Dark One. Like
I like that Armentrout's able to do that through Poppy's perspective, who will be the last person to find out. Like yeah
like even when she finds out, she's still the last one. She's somehow the last after herself even.
So then there's a moment where she finds out. How does that go down? I remember being utterly confused because I did know that Hawke, I did know there was something more going on, but I didn't know he was going to turn into this like, and this is like tail end of the book, literally. Yeah. And I'm like, are they gonna wrap this up? And I realized that Armentrout's a
cliffhanger.
It doesn't wrap, and she starts the next one leaving right where we left off, and like so it was like literally the last chapter, maybe 10 pages or something. All of a sudden Hawke is this person you don't recognize, almost like Castiel.
It's funny because like like we talked about the very beginning, the very opening scene is drawn out over like 6 chapters.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of the action is drawn out over a couple of chapters.
Yeah.
Because you've kind of got like what happens and then Poppy winding down from what happened while other action is happening. But the ending stuff really happens very quickly. You've got one of the knights who was not part of the kidnapping plan who realizes what's happening and tries to get Poppy free, but in the scuffle dies. And Hawke doesn't really announce necessarily that he's the Dark One. He's just standing there in the barn. They're surrounded by people who are all part of trying to kidnap Poppy. They're like referring to him as like your highness or your majesty and things because he's like the prince of the Atlanteans. And
Right.
she's still not putting it together. And I'm like, girl, do I need to walk you over there?
So that was just all so confusing. I think I like reread it because I was like, what is going on? It was very chaotic. And I think that is indicative of what Poppy's going through. Like it's very chaotic. It's very like, what's going on? There's
at that point, there's no way for her mental walls that she's used to putting up. Like there's no way for them to shield her from what's happening, from like the breakdown of her current situation.
Yeah, because the person she trusted to protect her, the people she's trusted to protect her, some of them have died. And
the others were not there to protect her.
Right. They were there to do other things. Who was the Wolven? Started with a J. I want to say Juniper, but I don't think that's right.
No, you're talking about the one that like
Jericho.
Yes.
So yeah, that little bastard. So this was really interesting because Jericho and his little gang of thugs like want to like kill her because she murdered one of their own or something.
It's because
they want to take her to the queen, so right?
Yeah, because the original plan had been to use her as ransom. Right. But then, of course, Hawke fell in love, and so Castile couldn't give her away.
Yes. So Jericho was going to head that up, but Castile hadn't come back yet. And so they were attacking her, whatever. Castile comes on the scene, goes apeshit, and like murders him. And he's a big guy.
So she nearly dies. Like,
yeah,
she's on her deathbed, and we find out like Atlantean blood is actually healing. It's not poison like the Ascended had convinced everybody. And so he heals her and makes her better. But in like the meantime of her getting better, Jericho and all of his conspirators had been like killed and then not posted. What's the word? Like stuck up on the wall, like with a spear, like hanging from the wall. But Jericho, because he was the ringleader, was the only one still alive with an arrow in his throat, just like slowly suffocating.
On the wall.
On the wall, yeah.
Yeah, so it turns fast.
Yes.
Like a minute ago, he's fingering her to sleep. Now we're like nailing people to the wall while we eat casually. Like, she's like, what is going on? And so what kind of freaked me out about it was that Castile was not there for her.
Yeah.
He has been in the past. And we lightly touched on this like over messaging, I think, because I was just like, I don't know. He just kind of got, and obviously like reading the next book, all of that kind of changed things. But at the time of reading it, I was like, this is what is going on, because he's just kind of like, you're going to be like my princess and like essentially like creating this new role for her.
It's funny because the book just ends with him saying, so we're going to get married now.
Yeah, exactly. That's
and you're like, what?
Yeah. And so like part of you is like, yay. And the other part of you is like, what? Like, because he hasn't been able to process anything that's happened. And so I think it's funny because you're like, is she like stupid or something? Because you kind of are in a way, like.
And like not
like why hasn't she figured this out yet? Why hasn't she like started this process of
yeah.
like processing all of this like earlier so that we could
So that she wouldn't be in this
we can
situation.
move on with
First
the
of all.
plot, like just for like the reader's selfish reasons, so that we can just marry Castile and live
Yes,
forever.
absolutely. If she doesn't want to, I will. No, so I do agree that like he just kind of shuts off after she finds out the truth.
And
But
she
it's
has
also
no
because
one. Like she has no one. Like
yeah.
like Victor just fucking died.
Oh god, yeah, don't remind me.
She just left her like home and her like friend, best friend, whatever.
Because Tawny didn't go.
Yeah, she left all she knew behind to go with him, and
But he was scared
kind of
that she would
abandoned
hate him.
what?
He was convinced that she would hate him. And that's the problem, is like he's already convinced himself. Because the night before we find like there's the big reveal, they actually finally have sex. And let's see here.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the very last thing that he says to her
And this is
when they're done.
before.
Yeah, this is before the reveal. So they've had sex. She's convinced that she's had sex with like the person that is only known as Hawke. And he asks her to promise him to not forget. And she's like, I'm not going to forget this. And he's like, don't forget that this is real. And
Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever happens the next day, don't forget this. This was real, is along the lines. And she was like kind of confused, but also like she was also like in her like
she was in her head still, so she was just like, that's normal. That's what people say after
she's
sex.
in her she's in her post-orgasmic phase of like, oh, I wonder what that means.
Yeah, pretty much. She's just like so jelly brained. And so like he's already showing regret. There's another line that he has where this is one of the lines that I had noted as like, come on, he's obviously not who he says he is, because he tells her, you deserve so much more than what awaits you. And so from the very beginning, he's showing regret for his intent for being there. Like from the very beginning of him even showing up at their palace as this knight with like shining accolades, he went with the intent of getting the maiden.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I'm convinced I'm of the pool of people who see this as he's not trying to ignore her, or he's not like actively ignoring her because he thinks he's like better than her or anything. He's just giving her the space to navigate this new situation. Because if he were to go in there and not leave her alone, she wouldn't even have the time or like the emotional space to deal with all of that.
Well, and I was just kind of frustrated too, because she would like be asking questions and like get punished for it. Like it was just like Kieran's just like, oh, you have more questions. What do you expect? You just like took this girl.
Yeah.
Like and Kieran, God bless him, because I liked Kieran more than I liked Castile for sure.
I don't really like Kieran that much.
He was really, but he's a brooder, and I like the brooders. He's just like at the door, or he's just always around, like when she happens to be like naked or something, I don't know, or like bathing or something, and it's just like there's like tension building there. So then you're like, what's going on? As a reader of romance, like you can tell when they're like opening a door,
yeah,
to like a possibility with like a person. So I was just like,
or with multiple people at the same time.
Yeah. So, but I liked Kieran because he answered her questions and like talked with respect to her and was as direct as a quiet, brooding personality could be. But Castile was just like never really around. And then it was getting almost kind of borderline, like, I don't know. There's that scene where they're in the library, all three of them, because like she can't be left alone.
Yeah, well, because somebody's gonna make another attempt on her life.
Yeah. And Castile comes in and like takes her into the pantry And like,
Oh yeah, when they're walking
they
back.
get all like hot and heavy in there. And it's like, you're not going to answer any questions, but you're like ready to like, there was just a little like, I think just the timing of things was a little off where I was just kind of like, I get it. Like you're not ready to like bear everything right now, but like, and you need like sexual tension, but like, I felt like that was a area where I felt like it could have been done better, where like you can use the sexual tension as a tension in their relationship.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like that was where it was directed. Does that make sense? Like
it was kind of directed as like a filler for us not having answers.
Exactly. Where
it's also like when he's trying to replan his whole plan. Like he announces that he's the Dark One. She's thrown in the cells, which doesn't last long because when she's in the cells is when she almost dies. And so he kind of admits that like seeing her almost die was a bigger turning point for him and his feelings around the situation because he didn't want to lose her. And so I feel like he's also like, how do I replan this in a way that'll make my people happy and also help me keep her? And so she's asking all these questions, but he can't answer them because he doesn't know.
Right. But he could have involved her in the decision making. He could have opened up what the world was to her. Like, oh, I come from this. This is what my family needs. This was the plan. Like, I love you and I want to like be with you. How can we make this work? And instead, he almost doesn't quite treat her as a pawn still, but almost, where he's just like, I'll ask her once I have it figured out. But it's like she's not allowed to have like any agency in like the decision making, which kind of frustrated me. But I also think he was.
It's also a protective measure because where is she gonna go? The only places that she knows is the like ascended.
I know,
and, like,
yeah,
she is, or he
is.
Also
what Victor would have done, right? That's also what Victor did. What else is she going to do? I am not going to give her a choice because where else is she going to go?
Yeah,
like I feel like at least give her the choice, and eventually he does, but he stumbles with it, and they never really address that. And I guess
he does get really, really possessive of her.
Yeah,
which I enjoy that.
Yeah, I no, everyone loves a little like possession.
Who doesn't love a good exorcism?
Yeah.
No, so he gets a little possessive of her, but he does like he is pretty open about like his family, the truth about like Atlantia.
Yeah.
It's just when it comes to the actual plan that he's not clear on. And that's because his plan ends up being, I know you hate me, even though she doesn't hate him. She's convinced she hates him, but she like so clearly doesn't. Yeah. He's like, I know you hate me, but now we have to get married. Oh no. And so this is one thing that I don't like, and this is just because I don't like this period, is that his idea of a proposal is to announce it in front of a room full of people. And like very public proposals like that are the bane of my existence. I literally refuse. If somebody were to do a proposal like that to me, I would do what she did and look him in the eye and tell him, are you insane?
Yeah.
Like, it's such a manipulative tactic. But that's because it was the only plan, the quote unquote only plan. It's the same trope as like there's only one bed. Yeah. Or there's only one room in the inn. Yeah. The only plan that they could possibly do is to get married.
And that's what felt very Outlander to me. That was another thing I said was like, oh, it reminds me of Handmaid's Tale. It reminds me of Outlander. And that's why, because, well, we have to get married for you to be protected.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I will say that, like, I won't give too much away, but Castile makes up for his miscomings.
Yeah.
The last book in the next book. I definitely am on the same page with him, but there's a real rough area where I think he's struggling. And I believe that. I believe that he's struggling, and that's why he's like doesn't feel very present with Poppy. But to me, it was never reconciled. It was never discussed. Armin Trout never like hashed that out. Like if
Action's very fast.
If
from
someone
here on
were
out.
to ignore me in like a really chaotic shift in my like life, and they were the only person I had, and they loved me, like they would have worked with me on that, and that wasn't very well. I guess I can kind of accept that maybe it was a rushed ending.
Well, she also
like
spends
trying to
most of the
finish
first
it.
book like expressing a lot of prejudice towards Atlanteans and towards Wolven. And so he's probably going into this thinking the second she finds out what I am, she's going to hate me because she hates all Atlanteans. And so again, like not to like spoil too much from the next episode, but part of book 2 is also her just like breaking down her own learned prejudices against his people.
Yeah.
Because she realizes how much of it is lies.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing, I guess like an overall thing that's present now that we've talked through the whole book, I want to pop back to that kind of like the lack of future mindedness that she has. So for me, that reminded me of Wollstonecraft. She's got her book, Vindication of the Rights of Women. And the main point of that book is that if we give women more power when it comes to their own agency beyond that which they get from like marriage, then what we have is smarter women because they don't have to constantly be present minded. So she goes like present mindedness versus future mindedness, like being able to make long-term decisions.
Yeah.
And so, which we've kind of talked about a little bit here with Poppy, is like she does not think ahead. We see like these mental walls that she puts up and that she is constantly like unaware of whenever she's right on the verge of an answer. But she just, anytime she tries to think about her ascension or moving to the next step, she doesn't think any much further. Like the fact that she waited until she was 18, and it must have been like 2/3 of the way through the book when she asked Duchess Tierman about the previous Maiden, shows just how much, even though like it's a present thought for her, she has not taken any action in pursuing the answers to those questions because she's scared, because she does not know what it means for her survival. And so like her survival is very much tied to her ability to be conscious in the present moment. Because you have like the psychological aspect of her being manipulated into this maiden, which we find out is a total farce. And then you've got the literal physical abuse that she undergoes with Duke Tierman, which is both of which are like the long-term constant trauma that she's experiencing, the kind of trauma that you like grow accustomed to. Like people in abusive relationships, they're not always the physical side kind of things, right? And so you grow accustomed to that kind of constant state of fear to the point where your threshold is so much different that you don't recognize it.
Yeah.
And so there is, like we talk about, the beginning of the book is really slow paced, and then the ending all that action happens really fast. And so it's almost like the pacing of the book itself is tied into her internal experience.
Yeah.
Like so much of her experience, she's not self-aware, but she's still so aggressively internal. She's not engaging with the world around her. And so everything else happens so much slower because there's so much more for her to take in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the chaos, the fast pace, the lack of direction really with where the plot's going. Like you're in the same palace. I don't think it's a palace. It's like an inn that they're in at the end.
Oh yeah. Like in that small town.
Yeah, it's some kind of inn, and you're there for a minute, like you're there for a bit, and yet all of these things happen, and it just kind of feels muddied, and like the process of events, the way Armin Trout kind of wrote it was very much with Poppy's in mind, and I think that could have been like kind of what you're talking about,
like our reading experience was very much like directly tied into her inner monologue, like her emotional experience during those situations.
And maybe she didn't want Castile to be there for her because she was angry at him.
Yeah. I mean, that's also possible.
That's a possibility, I guess.
Because at first she's very convinced that she hates him. And then it turns into she's convinced that she has to hate him.
Right.
Because being the Dark One, he was inadvertently responsible for Victor's death. And that's something that she spends a lot of time working through.
Right.
And then she was realizing that he's also responsible for the guard who died very early on. What's his name? Rylan. So the guard whose like position he takes, he was directly responsible for Rylan's death because he needed to get that position.
Right. There's a lot of death, like even Jericho. Yes, he tried to murder her, but she kind of entered this new world that was really, really harsh. And he will stop at nothing, right, to protect her and make sure no one harms her. And if he catches a whiff of it, they'll be nailed to the wall as well. And so it was
literally
very literally harsh, violent world that was revolving around Castile that now she's a part of, and she doesn't like really know how to break it down.
And the thing is, it's not like she's averse to violence. She is a violent character, and I love that about her. I absolutely love that about her. I mean, when I was reading through it, I kept telling you how much and like texting you how much I loved how violent she was. But in terms of like the life that she's led, it's been pretty sheltered. She's had to seek out violence. It hasn't really ever come to her until recently in the book, in her life. But the world, so what's this? Is it Solis? Solis? How you say their country?
No, it's Solis. It's Solis.
Solis, okay. Which sounds eerily close to soulless.
Yeah.
Okay, so the country that she's from, Solis, is a violent one. She just hasn't been privy to those things. So like we find out that the Ascended are actually just kind of like these like soulless people, vampires kind of, that eat the third and fourth children of every family. They don't have any emotion. She's never felt any emotion from them. And so she always thought it was because they were ascended. But when she starts to feel the emotions of other like people, like other beings, like Atlanteans and Wolven, she realizes that they might just not have anything worth feeling, that she like anything to detect. And they're the reason that the Craven exists, because it's when you get bit by an Ascended and you don't die that you turn into a Craven. And so the violence has always been around her. She just hasn't seen it up front and up close like that.
Yeah, and I think it was like just a really big wake up call that like, okay, this is the real world. It needs to get this violent first.
Yes.
You know? Well, I think we pretty much covered the book, everything we really wanted to talk about.
Without spoiling book two too much.
Yeah, hopefully we didn't spoil book two much. Sometimes I spoil and I don't realize I am. You're like, stop talking. So how, Melissa, would you rate, or how did you like the book overall? Would you recommend it?
I have been recommending it to everyone I've talked to for the last 3 weeks. So I would have to say yes. It is one of the better YA series that I've read, in my obviously in my opinion. I like that Castile is this tall, dark, mysterious figure, but he's still humanized a lot. Like I get a taste of the old male love interests that I used to read about when I was younger, but this time they're not this disgustingly flat character.
Yeah.
He is a complex character, and I really enjoyed that. It was a nice jump back into reading for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I rate this high on my list.
Well, you rate it high too, because he calls her princess.
Shut up. This was the book that I mentioned that about, yes. So
we were talking about pet names and romances and stuff, and you said, what did you say?
I think I probably said something along the lines of, I hate myself, but I love when he calls her princess, especially because it starts out with him teasing her.
Uh-huh.
And I really love that. I love a good like flirtatious tease. It's the only way I know how to flirt. And then during some of this, like the intimate interactions, he uses it and she doesn't really fight it.
Yeah.
Like she fights it when they say it in real life.
Yeah.
But then he starts calling her that in bed a couple of times and she's into it and I'm into it.
It becomes endearing.
Yes. Yeah. Especially because now they're going to get married. She's
Yeah.
literally going to be a princess.
Literally. Yeah. I did not miss the irony in there.
Yes. What about you?
I genuinely liked it. It was a bit of I was reading like Sarah J. Maas for a big minute there, and then like had to kind of get into the zone of like first person and Armentrout's writing, which is a bit more, I don't want to say cryptic, but you have to read between the lines a bit more, I think, than in other books. Like there's just a lot going on, I think, in like interactions. I've been reading a lot of new adults, so it's like everyone's had sexual partners and stuff. So it was like kind of fun to like go back into like teenage mode where we're just gonna, like, you're just gonna like rub over the underwear, like.
And it's fun because like Poppy's a grown woman, so she has grown woman thoughts and opinions. But then when it gets to the sexual element, you're a kid again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so nice. So the funny thing is I've read a lot of like YA because, and I think I mentioned this in the last episode, I was a big reader when I was younger. Huge reader, like escaping her life status, reading 5 books a week kind of reader. And so jumping into this kind of like, this is definitely like new adult, young adult borderline, because he's like so much more fleshed out. It felt like an adult version crush of the ones that I would get on the books when I was younger. Like I feel like I like him like as a person, not just as this kind of like 2-dimensional book character.
I think I like him as a person.
Yeah. And so like there was this point when I was like, man, I need a man like that. And then I had to just kind of sit there and realize that I was talking about a fictional character, which I realized to like other people in this community is a totally normal thing. But I had forgotten what that felt like. Yeah. That was a fun revelation for me. Yeah. Again, is this just because I haven't been touched in over a year?
Perhaps.
Probably.
Well, we are super excited to like get into the next book. Next week, we will be talking about a kingdom of flesh and fire. So go read it. Go read it now, and then we will talk about it next week. We also want to hear about what your experience was reading it, what you agree with, what you don't agree with, what you thought about From Blood and Ash.
What you wish we'd talked about.
Wish we talked about that we didn't. Tag us on Instagram, comment, tell us your experiences, and we just love to like talk about it. So our Instagram is at inbedwithbooks_. So we'll see you there.
Join us next week.
Happy reading. Bye. He tilted his head to the side. What does it feel like? Air hitched in my throat. What?
I just love this scene. I'm sorry.
I thought like I had like a booger or something, and you're like,
no. I was like,
you were entranced by the read.
I was getting into it.
I'll start again. That's a good first draft.
Okay.